My cousin's here.
Okay, now I'm nervous. You're always more nervous when someone's family is here. But just start with the obvious. Why a memoir now?
I think my brother and I are the only surviving members of the immediate family. And I, over the years, I'm from a long line of storytellers, and I've gathered a few over the years. And, I'll try them out at a dinner, and I'll say, oh, that went over pretty well. And I would just make a little list, it would build. But, as time went by, and I lost my mother, and then my father passed, and John and Joan, my aunt and uncle, I got more sort of perspective on their lives and my own, and how I fit into the family. And I thought, much like when I had a perspective about Joan's life, my aunt, and I made a documentary about it, I thought, I'm the only one who could tell this, and it's kind of amazing. I mean, when I was writing it, I can't believe this happened, and all these different things in our lives, and my parents and brother and sister, were, going through so many different periods in their lives, and my parents in particular grew out of such tragedy. It made them stronger, and I wanted to tell that story.
I read because your quotes from your book are sort of appearing, and quotes from your interview are all over the place. And one of the things you said is you thought at one point that it would be a series of amusing anecdotes, but it's so much more. And I'm wondering, when did you sort of have the inkling that there was a lot of sort of unfinished business that you needed to sort of deal with?
Well, I sold the book as if it was going to be a David Sedaris type Me Talk Pretty about his very funny family, and I'd have chapters, and my editor said, that sounds great, and they bought it on that premise. But he said, why don't you write it chronologically? And I thought, oh, what a boring idea. And then I thought, well, if I write it chronologically, I've got to bring in Pancho Villa into this, who brought on my mother's side of the family, who drove, my great-grandparents to the border town of Nogales, and I have to go to the Ireland and the Great Famine, and then I went all the way through, and the more I got into them, my parents and their childhood, and each of them very difficult. My father was abused by his father, and my mother grew up in a cattle ranch all by herself. Not all by herself, but isolated as an only child. And I just sort of got into their childhood, and I just kept on going, and the structure became completely different as I went on.
Right. We were curious. This book is filled with amazing conversations. And did you keep a diary during those years? I mean, how are you able to sort of recreate these amazing conversations that were around you when you were growing up?
Well, there's certain things either that I was told that made a huge impression, they just never left. And then there's certain things that I witnessed, and they just never left. And those are the things I was jotting down. And they were, and once I was, looking at my laptop and writing it all out, not to get spacey about it, but I really felt like transformed. I just felt the texture of the rooms and the dialogue, and there was a period when I was 16 years old, and I remember this meeting Carrie Fisher, who had become a lifelong friend. And while I was going through that, and I remember meeting her, and our conversations, I would laugh out loud while I was typing. She just came to life for me. So, I don't know that those were the exact conversations, but that everyone who knew her said, my God, you brought her to life. That was exactly her. So I was very proud of that, and I could feel that, and I loved that. And then that would happen with just about everybody else in my family. The words just sort of came out that, that's what they said. That's what I remembered.
Amazing. You talked about the documentary you directed about your aunt, Joan Didion. And in it, I think we have a scene from it. She talks about the sort of scene that was at her house. And I think Amy alluded to it in her introduction. And I think we could play that. But it's amazing the world that you grew up in. I mean, your father, your mother, the parties, and then, yes, your Aunt Joan as well.
My husband, my daughter, and me. We finally got our house. Everybody showed up at this house. Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Warren Beatty.
Everything, seemed to be going so well.
The interesting part of the story is the failure to plan for misfortune.
Which pretty much sums up your family in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But, did it feel normal to you growing up in this your parents had these parties, your aunt and uncle had these parties, that you were surrounded by people that appear on screens?
Yeah, my perspective would change on it. Growing up, my parents, when I was, 7, 8, 9, 10, while they were married, gave these elaborate big parties and people in black ties and orchestras playing, which, sounds terribly glamorous. But when you're a little kid and you have a father who makes you come down to say goodnight to the guests, and we're in matching bathrobes, and my sister's dressed like a Victorian Dickens character, and we had to bow, and she'd curtsy. We were like, this isn't fun. But, I became a filmmaker later on, and I'd look. My dad gratefully kept a scrapbook, which I used to tease him about, of everybody who came to his house. And he was a great social photographer, really very talented. And he would iron these pictures of people who would come to his parties as if this ain't gonna last. And these were his priorities. And as children, it made us a little uncomfortable that this was such a priority. But, as I got older, I look at these scrapbooks of the most incredible filmmakers, of George Stevens and John Huston and Billy Wilder, and I wish I was old enough to talk to them about, Some Like It Hot, but I wasn't. I was a kid who just bowed to them. And these scrapbooks are something, I treasure them. They're documents of Hollywood at a very particular time.
Your father is such. I think one thing a way to describe him, he seems like a mass of contradictions in a way. Like, you alluded to the fact that, he was beaten by his father. And he was definitely not his father's favorite. And he had a really brutal upbringing.
Yeah, as I use one of the epigraph of at the beginning of the book is actually from him, where he said to me at one point, what can I say, kiddo? I'm a work in progress. And, he was all his life, and when I was, a little kid in this party times I was talking about, he was really his priorities were very facile, and to be identified himself, his identity, by who came to his parties, and he was struggling with alcohol and his, his sexuality, and he was living in a state of tremendous fear, and which I came to realize as I got older what pain he was in, and how alone that was, and of course how self-destructive it was, and he became, and then when he lost everything. I've never seen anyone lose everything. He had sold all of his. When no one would hire him and no one took his calls, and all these celebrities who drank his booze dumped him, he had a yard sale and sold all these things that he loved, and these end irons, and all these people who drank his liquor would come and barter with him about, to buy all this stuff. But it humbled him. It was a terrible humiliation. He lived in Oregon. He ended up in Oregon because he drove north, not knowing where he was going to go. The car broke down, and he lived in this town. And he went to AA, and he got sober, and he started to write, which is what he really wanted to do. And that was his next work in progress. And then, I always knew I could write about his flaws because I knew where he was going to end up, which was this fearless man who became a famous journalist, a crime reporter who went after power, went after entitlement of men who abused women and murdered them and had the attorneys to pay to get them out of it. So, it was a real work in progress. It was a real incredible arc to follow.
Though he did show early signs of being pretty fearless. I mean, one of the little things that you talk about in the book is, teeny little thing is, your father was also a decorated World War II hero.
That was the most remarkable thing, that, this was, a man who, even when he was a well-known writer, he still, having had lost everything, he could never get over that he was famous and that he was recognized. So he would always tell you, just unabashedly, he loved being famous. He was once at a hotel in the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, and he called him, left a voicemail on my phone. He goes, "You're not going to believe this, kid. I was in the elevator with Bono. Bono knows who I am. You know the Irish guy? Bono, I can't believe it." And he just loved all that kind of stuff. So he wasn't shy about his accomplishments. The one thing he never talked about until Saving Private Ryan came out, and he called me up with a sense of urgency. He'd already been diagnosed with prostate cancer. So I thought, I canceled whatever I was going to do. I came right over. I knew it was important. And he said, "I saw this movie, and it had just come out. And he told me about this night in the Battle of the Bulge. During the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of Metz, he and another guy who was also kind of a preppy and not particularly masculine guy, they were on forward point. And the orders were to retreat. But my father and this other guy, they were called the Glimmer Twins. They were constantly teased by the other. They on the other side, they saw these two very wounded, seriously wounded Americans, not from their company. And they carried these guys all night long, all the way through the artillery. And he never talked about it. Of all the things,
But do you think did your mother know about his World War II heroism?
He probably might have, in the early years of courtship, to impress her as a young man, might have. But it wasn't. Listen, I mean, there's so many. They didn't have any support for veterans in those days, and I think that was a trauma that was that he lived with, as did so many countless other survivors of that war. That generation, they did not talk about it. So it wasn't like he was being modest. I think it was he talked about it because that movie unearthed something that he'd so far gotten, that he'd managed to suppress for a really long time.
Okay, so we're going to go back to you,
I
and
like talking to everybody
leave you forward a few decades from World War II, because you sort of knew that you wanted to be an actor fairly early. I mean, when you were in school, you were doing the school plays.
I was, and I thought I would be. I wasn't sure. I was still kind of like. A little embarrassed about being from a town called Beverly Hills, where the Beverly Hillbillies were, and so I would always bury that kind of showbiz side. And I mean, when I was in high school, the drama department had, had me bullied me into auditioning for an Edward Albee play, one act called Zoo Story, and then I went, okay, this is what I want to do. And then I really became Joe Actor on the campus, and I was going to be a Iago. And I started early because I got kicked out in the 10th grade. And then I started, okay, well, I'm never going to go to college now. But so I started acting a little bit in Los Angeles, then I moved to New York.
And you had a whole series. And you know, the stories of how you get kicked out is a whole other saga. But I kind of want to leap to New York a little bit because for a couple of reasons. One, you know, you kind of you didn't really want people to know that you were from Hollywood when you were becoming a New York actor, not a Hollywood
That's
guy.
right. That was a big difference, you know, in those. And also to not do television. I actually got cast as one of the kids in Carrie, and I turned it down. Not that I'd ever even done anything, and I turned it down because I wanted to go to New York, go to the neighborhood playhouse. And my agent, I actually had an agent, and he just said, "You're insane." But I always wanted to live in New York. I never saw myself living in Los Angeles.
And incidentally, for a period of time, you had a roommate.
Yes, yeah, I mentioned it earlier. And then, yeah, Carrie and I were roommates, and I wasn't acting. I was a waiter either at a restaurant called Beefsteak Charlie's, or I was a popcorn concessionaire
Right.
at Radio City Music Hall. A job of all the, this isn't what I do for a living jobs, that was the best one. And Carrie and I would, you know, Carrie was like, she was in the chorus of her mother's musical. Debbie Reynolds was on Broadway in a Broadway show called Irene. And she would go for auditions and stuff, and then, and we just laughed our ass off all the time. We were very, you know, funny about it. And we found each other hilarious. And then I came back from work, and she said, "Oh, I got this job. Shoots in England. I'm going to be away for a while." And I go, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's so stupid. You would hate this thing." And I go, "Well, who's in it?" And he goes, "This guy named Mark. You wouldn't know him." And then, "Well, how old is he?" He goes, "Well, he's your age." "Oh, come on, really?" And then there was Harrison Ford, who was also in it, who I knew when he was a carpenter, because he built my aunt and uncle's deck. And then she would call me from England and just go brag on this movie. I got bagels on the side of my head. This little person in a trash can follows us, and there's some monkey. We have ray guns. They don't even have triggers. He goes, "This is going to be such a turkey. You're so lucky you're not in this movie." And of course, it was Star Wars. And then we go to the opening, not the opening, the sneak preview, and it was at the Ziegfeld, which is the biggest theater in New York, movie theater. And you know, something in the science fiction community or something, I don't know, they were getting calls into their aluminum foil hats that this was really amazing. Or then there was a huge crowd of just Trekkies and all sorts of kind of very eccentric people who just were called to this screening. And then in this enormous theater, and the thing started to roll in a galaxy, and it just blew us away. It was like movies were never the same. But, you know, for a period, our friendship wasn't the same, because it's a very odd thing when you know someone since they were 15, and then, like, overnight they become so famous. And then suddenly they're, you know, the people of our friends that would come over to our house who were, like, you know, in choruses of Broadway shows, or friends of mine from Beefsteak Charlie's. Suddenly there's, like, the Eagles and, you know, James Taylor and, you know, movie stars. And I thought, and I'm, you know, counting my tips and my quarters, when I come off my shift, and there are all these people that it wasn't my time to meet yet, you know? So I moved out, and our friendship rekindled later.
And of course, I think that she's another person who, what was it like to sort of go back and revisit her now having
It was one of
unfortunately lost
my
her?
favorite parts of writing. She's because she's such a vivid character in my mind. Her wit and her sense of humor, and and her take on things, and she really found her calling. She never quite took acting that seriously, but she found her calling as a writer. That was what she was meant to do, and that's what she never, no matter what her struggles were, everything. She always had a legal tablet. She wrote from the bed, and she never had a legal tablet. Was just writing all the time. Really funny stuff.
So, of course, here you are still working to make it as an actor, and one of your big breaks was An American Werewolf in London. And you play one of two young men who go to London, but then also go hiking on the moors and then get attacked, unfortunately. And one of them ends up in the hospital, David Naughton, and then you, in your character, visit him. But unfortunately, as we can tell, I think we have that scene too, you're not at your best. Things have happened to you. So
Not a good look.
just to prepare the audience, he does not look good. But I think we have that scene.
David! What? Now, I'm really sorry to be upsetting you, but I have to warn you.
Warn me?
We were attacked by a werewolf
I'm not listening to this.
on the moors. We were attacked by a lycanthrope, a werewolf. I was murdered, an unnatural death. And now I walk the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted.
Shut up.
The wolf's bloodline must be severed. The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David.
And you have to do all the exposition, incidentally.
I have trauma just remembering that makeup being put on.
Well, that's the thing, because it was your first big break, but you actually have a really interesting take on this in the book, because what it was like to actually see yourself like that, because it's pretty good makeup.
Yeah, I was flown. I hadn't done really anything, and I I didn't even audition for it. I don't know what John just saw something in me. John Landis, the director, and it all happened very, very quickly. And then I had to go to Los Angeles before going to London to shoot. And the Los Angeles was to do the makeup tests. And I remember being asked before he totally offered me the job and I hadn't read the script, "Are you claustrophobic?" And so I thought, okay, it's a movie about a guy in an elevator or something. And he meant when I got to Los Angeles, they put your head in plaster and two little straws, the only thing that keep you alive, that are in your nose. And it is, pretty, that was, pretty startling. But the application took, the first time it took 5 hours, and then it takes 3 hours to take it off. And it kind of shortened down. Rick Baker's a genius. He won the Academy Award. They'd never had a makeup category until this movie. And he was the first one to win it. But it was so real. And my mother had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I always spent, even from a young kid, I was worried about her. I was very protective of her. I was the little man who always looked after her. And I thought that when I looked at myself, I went, this is exactly what I would look like if I was torn apart by a wolf or some animal or some crazed maniac. It was and it got me very depressed and also very worried about my mother seeing this. She's going to see her son be murdered. And I knew it was a big break on the one level, and it was all wonderful. But I remember Rick Baker, and makeup people and people who love Halloween, they just love to look covered in blood and everything. and that's not my thing. And so I didn't enjoy it as much as he was thinking I would. And he goes, "What's wrong?" And I went, "No, it's good." I had I don't know, it was weird. It was like, so that's what I'll look like. And I just worried about my mother seeing it. Anyway, it was all fine. I don't even know if she did see it, but that was my reaction.
I think we have an After Hours fan, and actually I will just leap to that part. Yes, After Hours, yay! So can you talk a little bit about how that came to be?
My producing partner, Amy Robinson, this was our fourth movie together, and she had read the script, and when she was at the Sundance Institute, and immediately thought of me, and we had made a movie, Baby It's You, before with John Sayles, right. And so we gave the script to Martin Scorsese. Amy was an actress in Mean Streets, one of Marty's first movies. She played Teresa between Bob and Harvey Keitel, and so she knew him. And but he was off to do Last Temptation of Christ, and he wasn't really available. So in the meantime, we went to see a movie, a Disney movie. I forget what the feature was, but there was a little 15-minute movie that was so brilliant, and we waited for the credits to see who it was, and it was a guy named Tim Burton, and we went, oh, so we went to him, and he was on a long line of assembly lines of animators on the Disney lot, and we met him. He read the script, and you meet this guy, and he's hair all messed up, and one of those short sleeve shirts, and the pen cases inked all over the place. And you could just tell this guy's brilliant, though. I mean, he did little drawings, and my character walking through hallways with bats in them, but we couldn't raise the money. And in the meantime, Scorsese's movie, this is the first time he tried to make Last Temptation, was canceled. He was truly in director's jail. He'd made King of Comedy, which lost a lot of money, and then he read the script. His first flight on the flight back from Casablanca. They were shooting in Morocco, and when he landed, he said, "I want to do this movie," and we were going, okay. And so we went to the lot, commissary, and sat down with Tim again, who heartbreakingly brought a little model, if things weren't going to be more torturous. And so we started to say, funny thing happened. And he knew we gave it to Marty. And he went, "Wait a minute, are you saying Mr. Scorsese wants to make this movie?" We said, "Well, yeah." And he said, I gracefully withdraw. We'll never do anything, to stand in the way of what he wants to do, which is very gracious of him. But as I say, his talent already stood out. He got a movie called Pee-wee's Big Adventure about 2 weeks later. Yeah. And our movies came out at the same time, and that movie kicked our ass.
Well, yeah. I mean, do you ever do the, if only?
No,
okay.
But I've always been curious about what totally different movie. So anyway, what was interesting about working with Scorsese on this was that he was excited about was he was going to go back to those Mean Street days when he, run and gun. And we brought our crew with Nabit. He'd never met worked with any of these people. Michael Ballhaus, who he went on to work with, and the costume designer he went on. And this was an entirely new crew. We had a head of the grip department was run by a guy named Tony Dunne, your brother, and who made a rig that nearly killed me. So it was really small running, and he was just invigorated. And he was really excited about making movies again.
And it incidentally also has a whole bunch of actors who you can recognize from other films. And I think we actually have the trailer. And you can sort of say, oh, wait a minute, I know this person. So if we could see that.
I met this girl tonight, okay?
Like something incredible was really going to happen here.
So when I got home, I gave her a call. On the cab on the way down here, all my money flew out the window. Then I got to know this girl, and I didn't really get along with her that well.
What's the matter?
So I left. I haven't got enough money to get home, so I go back to the girl's apartment and march right in there to apologize, but she'd already killed herself. I was too late. Come on! I'm in big trouble.
Help! Help! Call the police!
Luckily, there was this girl who was there who witnessed the whole thing.
You're dead, pal.
And what? So now she's the one in the Mr. Softy ice cream truck who's trying to kill me. They're all trying to kill me. I mean, I just want to meet a nice girl, and now I've got to die for it?
What do you want from me? What have I done?
I think you also say in the book that this was a very appropriate role for you.
Weird shit does happen to me.
Just the sort of hapless, everything happens to you.
Yeah,
That's
I'm very
you.
reactive.
But I'm just curious, you know, a lot of actors sort of like go into producing later in their careers after they've like made like several large movies, and then they want to have production credit. You did it really early.
My break before Werewolf, but was I produced a movie by based on a book called Chilly Scenes of Winter by Ann Beattie, who was actually teaching at Harvard when my producing partners Amy and Mark Metcalf and I drove to, we were all in our 20s, and we talked Ann to give us the rights. We got roaring drunk, and she agreed, and we made this movie. None of us had ever produced a movie before, and I gave myself a small part in the movie. Joan Silver directed it, and it was from that actually that things started to take off, because there was a small part, but it got a big laugh. So I did have a reverse thing. I had to make a movie in order to get a job.
But then when like offers came in, often you were producing instead. So, I mean, do you sort of regret being more of a producer than an actor? Or?
I would have moments in the moment of recognizing, wow, I just made this After Hours movie, and I should be running headlong into fame. And I would retreat and then go behind the camera and, produce a movie that Sidney Lumet was going to make, or Lasse Hallström, depending on different things. And, while writing the book, I kind of, dove into those years of very odd choices. Some might say self-destructive career choices. But I was kind of assessing, really for the first time, really just sitting there and thinking about my relationship to fame, and growing up with where there was a commodity that was so expressed, and then seeing what that business did to my father, or what he did to himself, and allowed that. I saw what the terrible backlash that can happen, and I also had peers who were quite successful and totally flamed out, on booze and drugs. And so I thought, I just knew something about me wasn't formed enough to sort of handle that much attention. It's people, if you look at actors, like, peers of mine, like Tom Hanks, to be, an actor for that successful, I mean, you have to be kind of brilliant in your choices, and you have to really know who you are and know what you can do. And I didn't possess that quality. I knew what a good script was, even if there wasn't a part for me. And it's a story I wanted to tell that I didn't have to be in. But those actors who, are now become like institutions in themselves, that takes a lot of real, calculation, and you have to be the CEO of your own life.
Is there a role you wish you'd taken, or?
Yeah, nothing's coming off the top of my head. I know that I was asked to do The Fly by David Cronenberg, who I really admired, and it was right after Werewolf, and I couldn't bear putting on all that makeup again. And I thought, later on I would kick myself and go, oh, you big wuss. All you had to do was put on makeup, for God's sakes. So I had a little twinge of regret about that one.
We do have to talk about Dominique, because she really overshadows, or she's just so much the book. I mean, you start with this when police detectives come to and tell your mother, and tell your father. I mean, this and you get told, and you were not at your best, and just but you give us that scene right at the beginning, so we know what's coming, but then we sort of go back to your growing up and all these lovely like moments of Dominique, like rescuing animals, like bringing home all these animals with like one leg, or like one leg missing, and her strength of will and her desire to be an actor, and she was just such a lovely spirit. I'm wondering, what was it like to sort of go back into that period of time, to be able to?
Well, as you said, all those things that you described, it was a delight to, and I literally start from the day she's brought home from the hospital. And my mother, who had a very tough life, had a lot of misfortune even before what was going to be happening. She had two little girls die at birth, one at birth and the other very late in termination. So when Dominique was born, and she actually was successful, my mother, she said, I finally got a little girl, And so I'm going all the way through that. But all the time I'm aware, I know where this is going. God damn it, this is not. And, when I get to that part, I hadn't opened the book at all like that. But I realized that when I did that, that was the moment that changed all of our lives, when she was murdered. And that's what the structure of my life and this book is. That's part 2. And that I knew. I just wrote part 2 and then plugged on. And, it was the moment that defined all of us. It's the moment that my father found his voice that he searched so hard for as a writer, at great cost. It led to him, covering these trials and taking on these politicians and various people accused of crimes. We thought there was a trial that happened that went disastrously wrong. The most terrible decisions were made by this judge. They didn't even call it murder when they convicted. When the sentence was passed, it was called manslaughter. He strangled her. It took 6 minutes.
Yes.
And but they said it was like an impulsive act or something. And so he served 3.5 years. That you'd think that would have, my mother was in a wheelchair, and we'd wheel every day to court. You'd think that would have made her worse. She became an activist. She became a victims' right advocate, and started her own group. There was a support group that came to the trial every day with us, called Parents of Murdered Children, that was started by Doris Tate, the mother of Sharon Tate. And they were incredible. But my mom wanted to start a group that would, pass laws to protect victims. So she did. She ended up getting an award from President Bush. She went to the White House. She senior, not junior, and she was in. When my parents divorced, they were. She really had enough of him. She was so relieved to be rid of him. But when this happened, suddenly they just sort of it was remarkable to see. They just sort of fell in love with each other again. And, Dad would sit by her bed and they'd talk about the old days and he'd make her laugh. And even when, on the nightly news that just finished, he had just played the travesty that took on that particular day. He could make her laugh. Laughing got us through everything.
I just want to. We actually have a picture of Dominique, and she was such a lovely young woman.
Yeah.
She was also very talented. She'd gotten cast in Poltergeist, and Steven Spielberg told you that, or told someone that he would have used her again, or he
Yeah.
was planning to use her again in other films.
This is from when she told me she wanted to be an actress. She was so excited, and I was so depressed. And I was, I was still being a waiter and just not getting any jobs and blowing auditions. And I went, "Oh, Dominic, don't do it. It's the worst profession. Don't do it, especially as an actress." She got very angry at me, and she went on an audition. Her first audition was for something called Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. That's what this is from. She plays the teenage hitchhiker. She came right out of the gate.
Right, and she of course came up with the Friday Afternoon Club, which
The title of the book, yeah. That was a acting class that, after acting class, all these young actors who we would grow to know, like George Clooney and Miguel Ferrer and Tim Hutton, and there were others. After class, they would go to my mother's house and just party well into the night. And I chose the title of that book because it has such a. It sounds like fun. It's everybody at the beginning of there.
and she sounded like fun.
And she was a lot of fun.
And just to unpack it a little bit, I mean, basically, the person that her ex-boyfriend had been abusive. I mean, he'd attacked her previously. He did strangle her, and she lingered on life support and then finally had to be taken off. I mean, we're talking about a brutal, ugly crime. And the trial really was a travesty. There was like all all this evidence, all this stuff that was not allowed. And
Well, that was a
your family
centerpiece.
was there and had to sit through that.
I mean, what made it sort of famous for being a travesty of justice was that, unbeknownst to Dominique and all of us, that this guy had a history of violence against women, and that he had put this woman, broken her, a previous girlfriend, broken her eye socket and her jaw, put her in the hospital twice. And her name is Lillian Pierce. And when she read in the papers, or you didn't have to read in the papers, it was on television, it was a big deal, and she saw that it was him, she was scared to come forward. We found out that when she drove to the funeral and stood out in front of the church as we were all going in, she was really wrestling with it. And finally, we became aware of her through unlikely events that this happened. The detective came up with this, realized this. And so they finally get her to testify. She's terrified. And she comes in, the judge does not allow the jury to see this, dismisses it, says it's prejudicial to hear this testimony. So they're out of the room, and Lillian is describing this horror show, and the killer's name is Sweeney, gets up. He's a very large man. He gets up like, enough of this shit, and he just starts to, like, as if he's going to go to her. We don't know if he's going to go to her or just storm out. But he's wrestled to the ground by the bailiffs. He struggles and struggles and starts yelling. And you see what Dominique saw. You see that. Like, we'd never seen it. Now everyone sees it, except the jury. And they get him, put him in his chair. And the judge says, I know what an ordeal this is for you, Mr. Sweeney. So, and for some reason, they didn't see that. It would have changed everything. And so when the when the verdict came down, we were absolutely shocked. And the judge says to the jury, on behalf of the state of California and the Dunne family, we would like to thank you for your service. And my father, that World War II hero, this is before, he became a writer. He stood up in that courtroom and he yelled at that judge. He said, "Do not thank them on behalf of the Dunne family. We do not thank you. You have served this. You have kept important information from this jury." And he goes, "You're going to be ejected, Mr. Dunne. It's too late. Eject me. I don't give a shit. I'm out of here." And then we all just leave. Actually, I was not there that day. I was shooting. But it's clear in my head what happened. And that's what changed everything. His outburst became like, what? And then the jury found out, and then the papers found out, and then, that judge was, his own children wouldn't speak to him as a result of that decision. And it ruined his career. And then Dad made sure of it when he wrote about it in Vanity Fair, about what we went through in that trial in an article called Justice. And it was the very first piece he ever had published.
And the thing is that actually one of the things that stood out for me also was, while you personally were sitting through this trial, you were also shooting a completely ridiculous comedy called Johnny Dangerously. I mean, the Michael Keaton, he's a gangster, you're his brother, you're a little naive. You become a lawyer and a district attorney, so essentially you'd be going after your own brother.
I'd be playing a district attorney, and then I'd be sitting behind.
Yeah, there is that too. But it's also a comedy, and it's also like.
Yeah. Oh, I was very. I don't know how I was able to do it, but I could totally disassociate. When I went to the set, the movie is it's a spoof on Warner Brothers. It's like an airplane movie, only about, Warner Brothers gangsters. So we're all like really big, and we're talking like that, and we're anything. And I played this overeager, sort of Mickey Rooney kind of guy. And it was a ridiculous character that I was able to grateful to play. So lucky to be able to go and nobody talked about the trial. Everybody knew about it, but nobody talked to me about it. We all pretended it wasn't happening. And I would be able to go on my days off from the trial or my days off from the movie. I'd be at the trial. This kind of crazy existence. And I had a lot of laughs. And the crew was incredible, and the cast, and Michael Keaton and I became like best friends. He was one of my closest friends to this
supportive.
day. And so, but my parents and my brother had no such relief.
Yeah.
They had to go home and sit in front of the TV, watching the nightly news with the TV trays, and but I did have at least some release from all that.
Right. And your father had this whole resurgence and became this amazing crime writer, and your mother became an amazing victims advocate. I mean, there are things that came out of there.
Yeah. I think that's what propelled me to write the book. I mean, I realized my purpose. You asked me, why now? I was thinking of something really funny, but as a anecdotally funny sort of book. But as I was in it, I realized I know I'm writing it. Just to let people know about my family, like how they became.
And how much love, because there is so much love. I mean, even in times where there's conflict, where there's misunderstandings, there's also the conflict between your father and his brother that went on for decades, but they finally managed to overcome that. I mean, there's a lot of love in your family.
Yeah, tremendous.
It's really, you find that it makes it another reason to keep turning the pages.
Yeah, well, that quality came because of my brother. My brother Alex, he's, then we're talking about 20 years ago, he was really struggling with, he was bipolar. Even before we knew it was bipolar, they had a different name for it. And he was really having a lot of struggles. He's very brilliant, sensitive, the most well-read prodigy of intelligence, and talked about philosophers from such an early age. And but I had to, the title, I had no idea what the title would be when I started, but I always knew the subtitle would be A Family Memoir. And I asked Alex, I just said, listen, I can't write this without, going into that period. It's not going to be what the book's about, but, if I'm telling this story, that's going to come up. And he said, you can say whatever you want about me. Just have it come from a place of love. And I went,
And
so I did that with everyone.
yes, and the book ends with a lovely moment of love that I really want everyone to discover. So I'm not going to talk about that, but it ends on a lovely moment of love and hope. But I wanted to ask you, because your father, had been a movie and TV producer, and then moved into writing, and then found this other career as writing. And reading this, you wrote such an extraordinary book here. I mean, it is a page turner. It really is. And now that have written this, have you thought of sort of like, I mean, yes, you've had success recently. You've been in Succession. You've been, you've had other acting roles. But have you thought of actually moving into writing yourself?
Yeah, I have. I mean, since I've written this, I've written an article, a Father's Day article, for the Wall Street Journal. I've written the introduction for a collection of Joan's books that are coming out in Vintage. It's a combination, and I really liked. I've never promoting something that I started from beginning to end, and it was all me, and now I'm out here all me, only me. I promoted movies and all sorts of different things as a producer, director, but you always got company. I've never done this, by myself. There's a certain kind of pride that goes with that, but I don't know exactly what I want to write. I have a couple of ideas, but right now I just can't believe I finished that one.
It's an amazing achievement, and I really cannot wait to see what you write next. And Griffin Dunne, it is called The Friday Afternoon Club, a family memoir. And yeah, it'll really get you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.